Following our look at the PS5 and Series X versions of The Witcher 3 Complete Edition, I'm back to check the state of Xbox Series S. So often we have to dial back our expectations for any Series S release, given it's a 4 teraflop machine up against the 12 teraflops of Series X, and in fairness, that 4 teraflops still pulls its weight for 1440p or 1080p gaming. And The Witcher 3 is no exception in fact. But then, recently developers have had a tendency to also strip out key features like ray tracing or higher frame rate modes from Series S, two big reasons to buy into this new generation of machines. For ray tracing features especially, the likes of Guardians of the Galaxy, Dying Light 2 and Cyberpunk all follow that pattern. The ray tracing option is there for PS5 and Series X, but absent on Series S. And today, The Witcher 3 Complete Edition is another we have to add to that list. No ray tracing here. On the plus side though, Series S does still offer a 60 frames per second performance mode and also a higher resolution 30fps quality mode. So, how does Series S compare to Series X then, in overall visual quality and settings? And does its 60 frames per second mode actually hit the target, or is it falling short? Let's find out. Booting Series S up, there are two modes in its graphics menu, each working a little differently to PS5 and Series X equivalents. Obviously, the resolution targets for each differ too. On performance mode, we're looking at a native 1080p target, and on its quality mode, we're targeting 1440p. Dynamic resolution scaling is possible of course, but in Series S's case, it's honestly been rare to see lower numbers in any of my tests. So often, each mode actually does hit its resolution target. Also, while we're comparing the two modes, there's a few other differences to note. Firstly, to hit 60fps on the performance mode, the foliage draw distance is dropped back a preset. In essence, it means more pop-in closer to the screen on Series S at 60fps, while quality mode draws in more plant life to the far distance. Otherwise, every other setting appears matched between the two modes. Reflection quality, textures, even world shadows, it's all exactly the same between the two modes. In my experience, the drop to 1080p and the lower foliage draw distance setting are really the biggest sacrifices to hitting 60fps. And honestly, I do still think 60fps is the way to go for this one, even with the blurrier image. The main reason being, just like PS5 and Series X, Series S suffers from noticeable input latency problems on its 30fps quality mode. I recorded a response time of 157 milliseconds on PS5 in its ray tracing mode, or 145 milliseconds subtracting my TV's own latency, and Series S has a very similar level of latency for every input you make. The fact is, camera movement and Geralt's animations are noticeably delayed, and the boosted res and settings compared to the performance mode just aren't worth that trade-off. So to the first question, just how does Series S compare to the Series X version with all the bells and whistles? If we focus on the 30fps modes on each, quality on Series S versus ray tracing on Series X, the obvious loss is the lack of ray-traced ambient occlusion and global illumination. Interiors lack realistic shading, and light bounce isn't as accurate. It's a stark difference indoors, with Series S's shading of materials appearing flatter. Though, in fairness to Series S, outdoors areas in broad daylight are reasonably comparable. Interestingly, the native resolutions aren't too different between them, since both sides run at a native 1440p for the most part. Now, one big loss on Series S, and a feature that I'd hoped we might still see despite the dropped RT features, is the updated screen space reflection technique. Alas, the new SSR is also completely missing on Series S, defaulting us back to the more basic last-gen method. It looks fine, we just missed the puddle reflections, the reflections on armor, that works so well on the PS5 and Series X RT modes. As an aside, and you might have noticed this already, but Series S's quality mode actually ran with a higher foliage draw distance setting than our Series X run, putting it on par with PS5. But honestly, I suspect this is a bug with Series X that will soon be Speaking of last gen, the older PS4 Pro version is perhaps a more realistic comparison point. After all, PS4 Pro is not far off in terms of the raw on-paper power spec. 4.2 teraflops up against Series S's 4 teraflops. Obviously, there's a huge difference in architecture between them, not least a higher clocked Zen 2 CPU that affords Series S a critical edge in visual settings. Again, let's hone in on the 30fps quality mode to show the game at its best. The foliage is a good place to start, which is boosted massively over PS4 Pro in density and draw distance. Now the draw distance is dropped a setting if you switch to Series S's performance mode, but in either mode, it's still a big upgrade over last gen. Equally, textures and models are all updated on Series S, in line with the other current gen machines, plus shadow resolution is boosted across the world. The final point here is also a huge bonus, in that the NPC count on Series S is also typically on par with PS5 and Series X, meaning areas like Novigrad are packed with bustling crowds, which PS4 Pro is missing. Elsewhere, the image quality difference is the only other thing to bear in mind. Series S renders at a native 1440p of course in the quality mode, while PS4 Pro targets 4K, reconstructing a 1920x2160 base image using checkerboard rendering. The net result is PS4 Pro does actually end up producing a sharper image, though without FSR 2.1, it's also prone to more shimmer on grassy elements. Also, on balance, the boosted foliage, high-res textures, shadows, and increased NPC count make Series S more presentable. It's a similar story with the older 1X version, which targets 4K as well, and generally produces a crisper image than what we get on newer machines, but without FSR 2.1 to address the aliasing. Let's kick off with the frame rate tests next, starting with Series S's quality mode. This took me by surprise because Series X actually hits a rock-solid 30fps no matter what I threw at the console, no matter which of the classic stress points I used. Even in the high-rux square, for example, which is a real CPU stress test for PS5 and Series X, there's zero issue. Series S has the same high NPC count as those much more powerful consoles, although without the ray tracing features of course, and it's absolutely holding 30. The one issue, I've noticed very occasionally you'll bump into an auto-saving hitch. These punctuate the experience with huge frame time drops, but on balance, the quality mode here is significantly better optimized for 30fps than the ray tracing mode on PS5 and Series X. The other stress test areas hold up too. Crookback Bog flows at a solid 30fps on Series S, as do many of the sub-30 points I found on PS5, like this Bandits battle. As an aside, one way to force a drop on Series S is to raise and then lower the camera quickly, essentially by looking to the sky and then sharply dropping the viewpoint to a woodland, for example. The DRS has to act quickly to lower the resolution. And within that window, yes, Series S does drop to the mid-20s briefly. But if this is the length you've got to go to for a drop, I'd say Series S is in pretty good shape. The quality mode runs brilliantly, it's more stable than PS4 Pro at 30fps too, sub-30fps drops aren't an issue, though much like PS5 and Series X on their ray tracing modes, you will still sadly have to deal with the input latency issue. In my experience, it just isn't worth it, which is a shame given the actual optimization for 30fps is solid. For Series S owners, the solution, in theory, is to switch to the 60fps performance mode. Here it targets 1080p, but the input latency issue is at least alleviated by virtue of running at double the refresh. The drawback? Well, it's not a solid 60fps lock by any means. For most horseback riding in the wilds, Series S hits the mark mostly, but there are significant dips anywhere around Novigrad Center. In fact, with drops down to the low 40s as we go through Hierarch Square, it's just much worse than PS5 and Series X are in their own performance modes. For example, here's Series S as we canter through down the center, and then if we switch over to Series X, we're getting a better return there. This really is the very worst performing section of the game, so keep that in perspective, But even other areas on Series S do struggle. This battle with the bandits has sub 60 FPS drops quite similar to PS5 for example, and then Crookback Bog also has its moments. In general, performance at 60 FPS outside of Novigrad is good enough, especially on a VRR supporting display. Inside Novigrad, that's another issue entirely, and it does need addressing. Between the sub 60 drops on performance mode and the high latency of the quality mode, there's really no 100% perfect way to play on Series S, though the performance mode is easier to recommend. There are benefits to the Complete Edition update in general, of course, regardless of mode. The loading times, for one, are much improved, near identical to Series X's, while the foliage and texture quality boosts are superb in their own right. The absence of ray tracing features is a loss, though again, the upshot is Series S's 30 FPS mode actually ends up running better than PS5 and Series X's more ambitious RT mode. It's a strange situation, but the verdict is similar to the one we had on the two premium machines. The Series S Complete Edition needs a bit more time, more work to iron out these rough points, because fundamentally there's a great release of The Witcher 3 here, perhaps with an update or two down the line. That's The Witcher 3 Complete Edition running on Series S in a snapshot. Just a quick look really, before rounding off for the new year, and chances are in the near future, I'll be looping back once a patch goes live. But in the meantime, if you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter as always. But from me for now, have a happy holidays and see you in the new year.